If you listen carefully, at the end, you'll be someone else. Gerald was standing in an aisle of the Egyptian section of the British Library, having just selected a book entitled The Secret Rituals of Ancient Egypt. "Good day, Gerald." A stranger wearing an expensive overcoat, a top hat, smooth leather gloves, and a walking stick with the silver head of an eagle as its handle, stood before him. Gerald was startled. How did this man know his name? "Good day, sir," he responded. "Forgive me, but do I know you?" It was clear this man was from the upper class, which Gerald was decidedly not. I think not, Gerald, but I do know you and your family." "Sir?" asked Gerald, confused. "How do you know my family?" "We have been watching you for some time, and we are intrigued with your interest in ancient Egypt." Gerald frowned, disconcerted. "You see, we have a job for you," the stranger continued. "An extremely important, if somewhat different job, which requires knowledge of ancient Egypt." "But I have a job, sir," replied Gerald. "Yes, as an accountant, you are a man used to figures and details and all things adding up. Yes." "Well, yes, of course, sir." "That's why we need a man like you, Gerald. You fit the bill very nicely. But, as I said, sir, I already have a job. Your daughter, Geraldine, is now 17, is she not?" Gerald was taken off guard by the change in subject. "Yes, sir," he said, frowning. "A nice touch to feminize your name like that. We noticed it hasn't stopped potential suitors from taking an interest in your daughter. Mind you, why should it? She is a very attractive young thing, isn't she?" Gerald bristled, etiquette fast falling with this man's casual tone yet intimate questions. "Now see here, whoever you are, I do not appreciate my daughter being discussed in such a manner by a stranger." "I'm sure you don't, Gerald. I'm sure you don't," the stranger replied, absently looking at the handle of his stick and stroking the eagle's beak. "And quite rightly so. You love your daughter, do you not?" Gerald stared hard at the man. "What kind of question is that? Who are you, and how dare you ask such personal and intimate questions?" The stranger snorted and rammed his stick into the ground. His face became hard and vicious. "Enough. It is time for you to go home. Talk with your wife, Gladys, is it not?" His face relaxed almost to a smile. "Good day." Turning on his feet, military style, he marched away. Gerald was left dumbfounded and angry. Who was this man? Who did he think he was? The more he thought about it, the more angry he became. He left the book he had taken from the shelf and ran after the gentleman. By the time he had reached the end of the bookcase, the man had disappeared. Gerald went to the banister running around the inside of this first-floor mezzanine level and looked down at the ground floor. He saw the stranger stride through the library and out the doors. Gerald hurried down the stairs in an attempt to catch him. Rushing through the ground floor, bearing frowns from the librarians and out of the doors, he searched all around, yet he could see no sign of the stranger. He walked a little up the street, popping his head above the crowds to try and catch a glimpse of the man, but to no avail. He turned and walked back down the street, repeating his popping and looking across to the opposite side of the street. Nothing. The man had vanished. Gerald could think of no other option but to return home and discuss this with his wife and daughter. He normally walked, but tonight he jumped on the number 17 bus. He stayed on the boarding plate, jumping off the bus to shouts from the driver as it passed his house. He ran up the walk, moving even faster as he heard Gladys wail and cry. The car pulled away from his gate. The front door was open, and a box lay on the floor in the hallway, with the top lying askew next to it. Gladys was holding a note in her hands and sobbing. "Tell me this can't be true," she pleaded to Gerald between sobs. "What?" asked Gerald. Gladys gestured to the box and handed the note. Gerald's heart lurched as he looked into the box, fearing the unspeakable. However, sitting comfortably on a crepe paper base was Geraldine's hat, the one she had put on this morning. He sighed with relief, then read the note. "We have Geraldine. She is safe for now, and will be until you have completed your job. Should you wish to see her again, follow the instructions under her hat. Follow them precisely. Upon successful completion, we will return her to you. If you do not complete the job, you will never see her again. If you involve the police or anyone else, you will also never see her again. Her life depends completely on your behavior and your success. The job is simple. Learn the incantation, apply it where and when explained, and your daughter will be returned to you. Do not let her down." There was a symbol where a signature should be, a symbol Gerald recognized from a book he had read on the Egyptian priestess, Princess Amun-Ra. He picked up the hat, took the envelope from under it, opened it, and read the instructions. The envelope held a ticket as well for the maiden voyage of the new luxury liner, Titanic. He passed the instructions to Gladys. She read them and looked him straight in the eyes. "There is no decision to be made here," she said. "You do the job." Gerald nodded, and taking the paper from Gladys, prepared to memorize the incantation. 2 months later, he was staring at his watch in a second-class cabin of the Titanic. 4:30. According to his instructions, time to move. He stood, smiled at his cabin mate, and left the cabin. Following the instructions he was given, he turned left, walked to the corner at the end of the cabins, and looking around to make sure he wasn't seen, slipped down the stairwell. The hatch at the bottom stated clearly, "Cargo hold, personnel only." He was slightly surprised that there was no lock on the door. No doubt this had been seen to as well, just like everything else on his journey. He spun the wheel and swung the hatch open. Stepping through, he turned, closed the hatch door, and spun the wheel again, closing himself in darkness. According to the instructions, there was a light switch on the left. He reached out and ran his hand over the smooth, cold metal, searching. He found the switch, and with a flip, the whole place lit up, blinding him briefly. The last part of his job began. Maybe the hardest part, he thought, as he looked around at the myriad of boxes, crates, bags, and other wrappings held in nets tied to the bulkhead. It would be small, designed to look like a typewriter case and painted with a bright purple, said the instructions, which Gerald had memorized by heart. Sighing, he climbed down the few steps and started walking around all the cargo, hunting for a bright purple typewriter case. Gerald saw it from a distance, the purple standing out amongst the wooden and metal boxes. It was in the last net by the end bulkhead. He ran up and found the net had been cut just to the side of the case. Reaching in, he pulled out the box and opened it. He could hardly believe his eyes. A gold funeral mask lay inside, the funeral mask of Princess Amun-Ra. He had never read or seen any mention of a funeral mask. Only Amun-Ra's sarcophagus and mummified body had been written about, and quite extensively, too. It appeared the mummy had a history of a curse. Apparently, the British Museum did not even want it on their premises, too many deaths and accidents having been associated with it. Now he was staring at the mummy's gold funeral mask. If the mummy was dangerous, what could the funeral mask do? Not for the first time Gerald felt fear, this time much more intense. Only the thought of Geraldine spurred him onwards. The mask's eyes were large lapis lazuli stones, staring at him as if alive. Glittering gems ran across its forehead and down its cheeks like tears. He recognized ruby, chrysolite, and beryl across the forehead, turquoise, sapphire, and emerald in a line under one eye, and jacinth, agate, and amethyst dripping from the other. Topaz, onyx, and jasper ran across the chin. These were the same stones in the high priest's breastplate in the Bible and Torah, stones of power. The mask's face itself was an exact likeness to all the paintings and drawings he had seen of the princess, and a replica of the face on the sarcophagus. It had to be hers. As always, it felt so familiar to him. The ship shifted and shook Gerald out of his reverie. He pulled a few boxes from the net and stacked them against the bulkhead as instructed. Placing the open case on top, he lifted the mask and leant it against the lid, again, as per the instructions. He got to his knees, realizing he had built an altar for the mask. Taking a deep breath, he started to murmur the incantation he had been repeating to himself now for 2 months. The mask began to glow. As he progressed with the strange words, he felt himself drifting and closed his eyes. His world filled with golden light, blue rays from the lapis lazuli eyes shining and the colors of all the gemstones piercing through the haze. He continued with the incantation, repeating it over and over. With each repetition, the light grew stronger and heat and power built. He felt like an Egyptian high priest channeling energy, changing the world around him. He had a brief flashback to standing on the steps of a temple, arms outstretched, power surging through him. Supporting the energy flow stood a priestess, wearing a golden mask beside him. He had done this before. This was not new to him. Past lives were something he had never thought of, but now became very real. He felt the presence of the priestess beside him now, and the power built to a crescendo. A ripple sprinkled around the edges of his awareness. He was too deep in his trance to realize. It was an explosion. He felt the energy through him fade, and the presence of the priestess grew faint and disappeared. Then he became aware of something lapping at his knees. Opening his eyes, Gerald found he was knee-deep in rising water. Faster than the power had flowed from the mask and through him, the water was rising. He tried to return to the hatch, but before he could get very far, the current picked him up, swept him forwards, and slammed him headfirst against the bulkhead by the hatch. He lost consciousness. A hand came through the cold water and grabbed him by the collar. Pulling him up smoothly from the water, the hand dragged him through the hatch into the corridor. It flipped him up and easily held him by his feet, waiting while water poured out of his lungs. Placing him back on the floor, golden light flowed from the hand to his chest, and Gerald started to breathe. As he spluttered for air, although still not fully conscious, the hand grabbed him by the collar again and dragged him along the corridor to the landing of one of the second-class stairways. Here, people were walking around confused, aware that something was happening, yet no one knew what or where to go and what to do. As he was dragged higher up the staircase, his body knocked against many more people who were confused and starting to panic. Bumping against one lady who nearly fell, Gerald started to come to. Opening his eyes, he felt disoriented and confused as he was dragged up the last few steps and through the door onto the boat deck. He recognized the deck by his many walks while he had waited for his time to act. He saw the lifeboat's covers lying scattered around the deck and the boats themselves in the process of being lifted over the railings at the edge of the decks. The more his brain started to work, the more he realized what was happening. The ship was being abandoned. Something serious must have happened. Several of the lifeboats had gone already, and he heard the order being repeated up and down the deck by the officers in charge. "Women and children first! Women and children first!" It was a chaotic scene as husbands said goodbye to their wives and children, watching them being lowered away, often in lifeboats that weren't even full. The ship lurched, the stern rising. The scene became even more chaotic, with many men jumping over the rails into the boats or simply into the water in a panicked effort to save themselves. Gerald was still being dragged along by the hand. He tried to see who was pulling him, but the more he twisted and turned, the less he could see. It was as if there was a mist at the end of the hand that gripped him. Finally, he was at one of the lifeboats starting its descent. The officer controlling the flow of passengers repeated the order to whoever held him. "Women and children!" The officer's voice faded away. "Of course. Let him off." Gerald felt himself lifted and thrown over the rails, landing in the lifeboat as it descended down the side of the ship. The boat started dropping faster and soon hit the water. He managed to pull himself upright and sit on one of the benches as an oar was shoved into his hands. He stuck the oar into the water and pulled. As he rowed, he started to get his bearings and looked around. The lifeboat was nowhere near full, and many were grabbing oars to help pull free from the sinking ship. At the back of the lifeboat, he recognized an outline, the shape of the head and the slump of the shoulders. He couldn't believe it. Surely he was mistaken. The shadow lifted its head and turned towards him, her face coming into the light and lighting up in more ways than one. The mask of Princess Amon-Ra flashed at him. The blue lapis lazuli eyes glittered and all the precious stones lit up. He nearly fell off the bench, looking down to steady himself. When he looked back up, the mask had disappeared, and his daughter's face stared back at him. For the first time, Gerald realized how closely she resembled Princess Amon-Ra. Geraldine launched herself from the spot on the bench to her father. "Daddy!" she exclaimed. As with so many things on this job, the impossible had become possible. Gerald held his daughter tightly in his arms in the middle of a lifeboat, leaving a sinking ship. "Come on, man! Pull your oar! Pull!" a voice exclaimed from behind him. Gerald reluctantly let Geraldine go and picked up the oar, starting to row for all he was worth. Once they had reached the Carpathia, the ship which collected all the survivors from the Titanic, his daughter shared her story of being kidnapped. Neither saw the man above them on the bridge steps, holding the walking stick with the silver head of an eagle, and watching them. He snorted and turned back into the bridge. Father and daughter hugged again, tears falling. Neither realized the role they had played in the fateful day. The day the Titanic and her secrets dove to her deep, dark resting place.